evening, friends, and welcome to Sleepy Time Tales, a podcast aimed at helping you to get a good night's sleep. Do you find your mind plagued with the stresses of modern life, especially when the lights are out and you're trying to get a restful night? Does your spinning mind keep you awake? Follow my voice down the path towards a good night's rest. Listen to me tell a story that will keep your mind from wandering to your daytime problems. The ones you can't solve right now and will be easier to solve well rested. Listen to my voice and allow yourself to drift, following the twists and turns of the story, but slowly letting go and drifting into sleep. Before we get on with the show, I'd like to take a minute to thank everyone who's been listening to this since it started back in 2019. The people who have listened, shared, and supported the show in many wonderful and kind ways. This podcast is still around, thanks to you. So if you would like to support Sleepy Time Tales, to help me keep it ad-free and going out to thousands of insomniacs just like you, please consider supporting it on Patreon at patreon.com/sleepytimetales. This is a monthly support that not only helps me to keep the lights on, but can also get you some fun bonuses based on how much you contribute. And there are goal-based bonuses that go out to all listeners when we reach those goals. If monthly seems a big ask, then you can make once-off tips through buymeacoffee.com/sleepytimetales, or the tip jar on the website. There's also some merchandise available in the Redbubble store in which you can reach through the show notes or via the website, sleepytimetales.net. In fact, everything that I mentioned with the link is in the show notes and on the website as well. But another huge way to help the show is simply to spread the word. A lot of people out there are really struggling to sleep, so if you know someone cranky and listless thanks to their struggles, just tell them about Sleepy Time Tales. And if you tell people on social media, make sure to tag me in. That's at Sleepy Time Tales on Instagram or Twitter, so I can see and I can thank you. Shout out to the music, which is Sweet Night and Friends by Kumiko. Their music is available on their website at loyaltyfreakmusic.com. And that's enough for that for tonight. Let's get back to the show. So what exactly is Sleepy Time Tales? What is it for? What is this strange thing, this strange idea, this podcast that you're supposed to fall asleep to? But lack of sleep is a health crisis in the 21st century, and this is a podcast intended to help those that it can to get a restful night. Do you find yourself lying awake at night, mind spinning and emotions in turmoil with anxieties of 21st century life? Do you wake up in the middle of the night, finding yourself not quite able to doze back off at 3 a.m. I'm here to help. My name is Dave, and I'm your narrator, here to help you into a restful night. Sleepy Time Tales is intended to be used as a distraction to what keeps you awake at night. Or maybe you can use it as background noise or even company. That's why I make these episodes quite long, so that I'm here for you, without any pressure of the end coming. As far as I know, there are a couple of different ways to engage with the show. The primary idea behind Sleepy Time Tales is that it gives you something to focus on, a story or an event that lets you keep your mind on a specific point, to stop it from spinning out into stress and anxiety, to help you focus just enough not to resist the embrace of a night's sleep. But maybe your needs are a little bit different. Maybe you just need some kind of background noise. In this day and age, sometimes people just need white noise, or the sound of the ocean, or the wind in the trees, or maybe some boring dude droning on, telling you a story. But whether you're actively listening or just leaving it running in the background, the important thing as you listen is you don't force sleep. Just keep a light mental grip on the thread of the story and allow the need for sleep to come for you. I'm hoping that you're asleep before I get to the end of the episode, but don't feel pressurized. This may not work on the first night. In fact, it probably won't. I recommend giving it a good 2, preferably 3 nights try, just to see if you can get over the strangeness of the idea, to get used to listening to my voice. Maybe my accent is strange, or maybe one episode, at first at least, isn't just long enough. Or maybe your problem isn't so much going to sleep. Maybe you find yourself waking up in the middle of the night, half asleep and staring at the ceiling while things start to nag at you. What I recommend is that you download a few episodes of the show, playlist them, and then let it run through the course of the night. That way, if it's still running when you wake up at 3 a.m., you can just pop your earbuds in and carry on and allow yourself to go straight back to sleep again. Or maybe you even wake up before your alarm, 60 minutes or even 30 minutes. You can do the exact same thing then. And you may wonder what the point is. What good is 30 minutes of sleep going to actually do for you? But I've had people actually thank me for suggesting that they do this. Because there's something different, something extra relaxing about allowing yourself complete relaxation right before the alarm. It's satisfying on a whole new, deep level. But it's so important as you listen that you try to relax. If you're new to the show and prone to late nights lying staring at the ceiling, this will probably seem strange to you. So give it a chance. Because I'm here to work with you, to create a safe space, a cocoon in which you can curl up and allow nature to take its course. So if you're still with me, thank you for staying. If you're already asleep, we'll chat again soon. And of course, you aren't hearing me, except maybe in a dream. This week we return to The Last Man by Mary Shelley. Chapter 3. Happy, thrice happy, were the months and weeks and hours of that year. Friendship, hand in hand with admiration, tenderness, and respect, built a bower of delight in my heart, late rough as an untrod wild in America, as the homeless wind or herbless sea. Insatiate thirst for knowledge and boundless affection for Adrian combined to keep both my heart and understanding occupied, and I was consequently happy. What happiness is so true and unclouded as the overflowing and talkative delight of young people? In our boat upon my native lake, besides the streams and the pale bordering poplars, in valley and over hill, my crook thrown aside, a nobler flock to tend than silly sheep, even a flock of newborn ideas. I read or listened to Adrian, and his discourse, whether it concerned his love or his theories for the improvement of man alike, entranced me. Sometimes my lawless mood would return, and my love of peril, my resistance to authority. But this was in his absence. Under the mild sway of his dear eyes, I was obedient and good as a boy of 5 years old, who does his mother's bidding. After a residence of about a year at Ullswater, Adrian visited London and came back full of plans to our benefit. "You must begin life," he said. "You are 17, and longer delay would render the necessary apprenticeship more and more irksome." He foresaw that his own life would be one of struggle, and I must partake his labours with him. The better to fit me for this task, we must now separate. He found my name a good passport preferment, and he had procured for me the situation of private secretary to the ambassador at Vienna, where I should enter on my career under the best auspices. In 2 years I should return to my country, with a name well known and a reputation already founded. And Perdita? Perdita was to become the pupil, friend, and younger sister of Evadne. With his usual thoughtfulness, he had provided for her independence in this situation. how I refused the offers of this generous friend. I did not wish to refuse them, but in my heart of hearts I made a vow to devote life, knowledge, and power, all of which, inasmuch as they were of any value, he had bestowed on me. All my capacities and hopes, to him alone I would devote. Thus I promised myself, as I journeyed towards my destination with roused and ardent expectation of the fulfillment of all that in boyhood we promise ourselves of power and enjoyment in maturity. Methought the time was now arrived, when childish occupations laid aside, I should enter into life. Even in the Elysian fields, Virgil describes the souls of the happy as eager to drink of the wave which was to restore them to this mortal coil. The young are seldom in Elysium, for their desires, outstripping possibility, leave them as poor as a moneyless debtor. We are told by the wisest philosophers of the dangers of worlds, the deceits of men, and the treason of our own hearts. But not the less fearlessly does each put off his frail bark from the port, spread the sail and strain his oar, to attain the multitudinous streams of the sea, of life. How few in youth's prime were their vessels on the golden sands, and collect the painted shells that strew them. But all at close of day, with riven planks and rent canvas, make for shore, and are either wrecked ere they reach it, or find some wave-beaten haven, some desert strand, whereupon to cast themselves and lie unmourned. A truce to philosophy. Life is before me, and I rush into possession. Hope, glory, love, and blameless ambition are my guides, and my soul knows no dread. What has been, though sweet, is gone. The present is good only because it is about to change, and the to come is all my own. Do I fear that my heart palpitates? High aspirations cause the flow of my blood. My eyes seem to penetrate the cloudy midnight of time, and to discern within the depths of its darkness the fruition of all my soul desires. Now pause. During my journey I might dream, and with buoyant wings reach the summit of life's high edifice. Now that I am arrived at its base, my pinions are furled. The mighty stairs are before me, and step by step I must ascend the wondrous fane. Speak. What door is opened? Behold me in a new capacity. A diplomatist, one among the pleasure-seeking society of a gay city, a youth of promise, favourite of the ambassador. All was strange and admirable to the shepherd of Cumberland. With breathless amaze I entered on the gay scene whose actors were the lilies glorious as Solomon, who toil not, neither do they spin. Soon, too soon, I entered the giddy whirl, forgetting my studious hours in the companionship of Adrian. Passionate desire of sympathy and ardent pursuit for a wished-for object still characterized me. The sight of beauty entranced me, and attractive manners in man or woman won my entire confidence. I called it rapture when a smile made my heart beat, and I felt the life's blood tingle in my frame when I approached the idol for a while I worshipped. The mere flow of animal spirits was paradise, and at night's close I only desired a renewal of the intoxicating delusion. The dazzling light of ornamented rooms, lovely forms arrayed in splendid dresses, the motions of a dance, the voluptuous tones of exquisite music cradled my senses in one delightful dream. And is not this its kind happiness? I appeal to moralists and sages. I ask if in the calm of the measured reveries, if in the deep meditations which fill their hours, they feel the ecstasy of a youthful tyro in the school of pleasure. Can the calm beams of their heaven-seeking eyes equal the flashes of mingling passion which blind his? Or does the influence of cold philosophy steep their soul in a joy equal to his, engaged in this dear work of youthful revelry? But in truth, neither the lonely meditations of the hermit nor the tumultuous raptures of the reveller are capable of satisfying man's heart. From the one we gather unquiet speculation, from the other satiety. The mind flags beneath the weight of thought and droops in the heartless intercourse of those whose sole aim is amusement. There is no fruition in their vacant kindness, and sharp rocks lurk beneath the smiling ripples of these shallow waters. Thus I felt when disappointment, weariness, and solitude drove me back upon my heart, to gather thence the joy of which had become barren. My flagging spirits asked for something to speak to the affections, and not finding it, I drooped. Thus, notwithstanding the thoughtless delight that waited on its commencement, the impression I have of my life at Vienna is melancholy. Goethe has said that in youth we cannot be happy unless we love. I did not love, but I was devoured by a restless wish to be something to others. I became the victim of ingratitude and cold coquetry. Then I desponded and imagined that my discontent gave me a right to hate the world. I receded to solitude. I had recourse to my books, and my desire again to enjoy the society of Adrian became a burning thirst. Emulation that in its excess almost assumed the venomous properties of envy gave a sting to these feelings. At this period, the name and exploits of one of my countrymen filled the world with admiration. Relations of what he had done, conjectures concerning his future actions, were the never-failing topics of the hour. I was not angry on my own account, but I felt as if the praises which this idol received were leaves torn from laurels destined for Adrian. But I must enter into some account of this darling of fame, this favourite of the wonder-loving world. Lord Raymond was the sole remnant of a noble but impoverished family. From early youth he had considered his pedigree with complacency, and bitterly lamented his want of wealth. His first wish was aggrandizement, and that means that led towards this end were secondary considerations. Haughty, yet trembling to every demonstration of respect, ambitious but too proud to show his ambition, willing to achieve honor yet a votary of pleasure, he entered upon life. He was met on the threshold by some insult, real or imaginary, some repulse where he least expected it, some disappointment hard for his pride to bear. He writhed beneath an inquiry he was unable to revenge, and he quitted England with a vow not to return till a good time should arrive, when she might feel the power of him she now despised. He became an adventurer in the Greek wars. His reckless courage and comprehensive genius brought him into notice. He became the darling hero of his rising people. His foreign birth, and he refused to throw off his allegiance to his native country, alone prevented him from filling the first offices in the state. But though others might rank higher in title and ceremony, Lord Raymond held a station above and beyond all this. He led the Greek armies to victory. The triumphs were all his own. When he appeared, whole towns poured forth their populations to meet him. New songs were adapted to their national airs, whose themes were his glory, valor, and munificence. A truce was concluded between the Greeks and Turks. At the same time, Lord Raymond, by some unlooked-for chance, became the possessor of an immense fortune in England, whither he returned, crowned with glory, to receive the meed of honour and distinction before denied to his pretension. His proud heart rebelled against this change. In what was the despised Raymond not the same? If the acquisition of power in the shape of wealth caused this alteration, that power should they feel as an iron yoke. Power, therefore, was the aim of all of his endeavors, aggrandizement the mark at which he forever shot. In open ambition or close intrigue, his end was the same, to attend the first station in his own country. This account filled me with curiosity. The events that in succession followed his return to England gave me keener feelings. Among his other advantages, Lord Raymond was supremely handsome. Everyone admired him. Of women he was the idol. He was courteous, honey-tongued, and adept in fascinating arts. What could not this man achieve in the busy English world? Change succeeded to change. The entire history did not reach me, for Adrian had ceased to write, and Perdita was a laconic correspondent. The rumor went that Adrian had become, how write the fatal word, mad. That Lord Raymond was the favourite of the ex-queen, her daughter's destined husband. Nay more, that this aspiring noble revived the claim of the House of Windsor to the crown, and that on the event of Adrian's incurable disorder and his marriage with the sister, the brow of the ambitious Raymond might be encircled with a magic ring of regality. Such a tale filled the trumpet of many-voiced fame. Such a tale rendered my longer stay at Vienna, away from the friend of my youth, intolerable. Now I must fulfill my vow, now range myself at his side and be his ally and support till death. Farewell to courtly pleasure, to politic intrigue, to the maze of passion and folly. All hail England, native England, receive thy child. Thou art the scene of all my hopes, the mighty theatre on which is acted the only drama that can, heart and soul, bear me along with it in its development. A voice most irresistible, a power omnipotent, drew me thither. After an absence of 2 years, I landed on its shores, not daring to make any inquiries, fearful of every remark. My first visit would be to my sister, who inhabited a little cottage, a part of Adrian's gift, on the borders of Windsor Forest. From her I should learn the truth concerning our protector. I should hear why she had withdrawn from the protection of the Princess Evadne, and be instructed as to the influence which this overtopping and towering Raymond exercised over the fortunes of my friend. I had never before been in the neighbourhood of Windsor. The fertility and beauty of the country around now struck me with admiration, which increased as I approached the antique wood. The ruins of majestic oaks which had grown, flourished and decayed during the progress of centuries, marked where the limits of the forest once reached, while the shattered palings and neglected underwood showed that this part was deserted for the younger plantations, which owed their birth to the beginning of the 19th century, and now stood in the pride of maturity. Perdita's humble dwelling was situated on the skirts of the most ancient portion. Before it was stretched Bishopsgate Heath, which towards the east appeared interminable, and was bounded to the west by Chapel Wood and the grove of Virginia Water. Behind, the cottage was shadowed by the venerable fathers of the forest, under which the deer came to graze, and which, for the most part hollow and decayed, formed fantastic groups that contrasted with the regular beauty of the younger trees. These, the offspring of a later period, stood erect, and seemed ready to advance fearlessly into coming time, while those outworn stragglers blasted and broke, clung to each other, the weak boughs sighing as the wind buffeted them, a weather-beaten crew. A light railing surrounded the garden of the cottage, which, low-roofed, seemed to submit to the majesty of nature and cower amidst the venerable remains of forgotten time. Flowers, the children of the spring, adorned her garden and casements. In the midst of lowliness there was an air of elegance which spoke the graceful taste of the inmate. With a beating heart I encountered the enclosure. As I stood at the entrance I heard her voice, melodious as it had ever been, which before I saw her assured me of her welfare. A moment more and Perdita appeared. She stood before me in the fresh bloom of youthful womanhood, different from and yet the same as the mountain girl I had left. Her eyes could not be deeper than they were in childhood, nor could her countenance more expressive, but the expression was changed and improved. Intelligence sat on her brow. When she smiled, her face was embellished by the softest sensibility, and her low, modulated voice seemed tuned by love. Her person was formed in the most feminine proportions. She was not tall, but her mountain life had given freedom to her motions, so that her light step scarce made her footfall heard as she tripped across the hall to meet me. When we had parted, I clasped her to my bosom with unrestrained warmth. We met again, and new feelings were awakened. When each beheld the other, childhood passed, as full-grown actors on this changeful scene. The pause was but for a moment. The flood of association and natural feelings which had been checked again rushed in full tide upon our hearts, and with tenderest emotion we were swiftly locked in each other's embrace. This burst of passionate feeling over, with calmed thoughts we sat together, talking of the past and present. I alluded to the coldness of her letters, but the few minutes we had spent together sufficiently explained the origin of this. New feelings had arisen within her, which she was unable to express in writing to one whom she had only known in childhood. But we saw each other again, and our intimacy was renewed, as if nothing had intervened to check it. I detailed the incidents of my sojourn abroad, and then questioned her as to the changes that had taken place at home, the causes of Adrian's absence, and her secluded life. The tears that suffused my sister's eyes when I mentioned our friend, and her heightened colour seemed to vouch for the truth of the reports that had reached me. But the import was too terrible for me to give instant credit to my suspicion. Was there indeed anarchy in the sublime universe of Adrian's thoughts? Did madness scatter their well-appointed legions, and was he no longer the lord of his own soul? Beloved friend, this ill world was no clime for your gentle spirit. You delivered up its governance to false humanity, which stripped it of its leaves ere winter time, and laid bare its quivering life to the evil ministration of roughest winds. Have those gentle eyes, those channels of the soul, lost their meaning? Or do they only in their glare disclose the horrible tale of its aberrations? Does that voice no longer discourse excellent music? Horrible, most horrible. I veil my eyes in terror of the change, and gushing tears bear witness to my sympathy for this unimaginable ruin. In obedience to my request, Perdita detailed the melancholy circumstances that led to this event. The frank and unsuspicious mind of Adrian, gifted as it was by every natural grace, endowed with transcendent powers of intellect, unblemished by the shadow of defect, unless his dreadless independence of thought was to be construed into one, was devoted, even as a victim to sacrifice, to his love for Evadne. He entrusted to her keeping the treasures of his soul, his aspirations after excellence, and his plans for the improvement of mankind. As manhood dawned upon him, his schemes and theories, far from being changed by personal and prudential motives, acquired new strength from the powers he felt arise within him, and his love for Evadne became deep-rooted, as he each day became more certain that the path he pursued was full of difficulty, and that he must seek his reward, not in the applause or gratitude of his fellow creatures, hardly in the success of his plans, but in the approbation of his own heart, and in her love and sympathy, which was to lighten every toil and recompense every sacrifice. In solitude and through many wanderings afar from the haunts of men, he matured his views for the reform of the English government and the improvement of the people. It would have been well if he had concealed his sentiments until he had come into possession of the power which would secure their practical development. But he was impatient of the years that must intervene, and he was frank of heart and fearless. He gave not only brief denial to his mother's schemes, but published his intention of using his influence to diminish the power of the aristocracy, to effect a greater equalization of wealth and privilege, and to introduce a perfect system of republican government into England. At first his mother treated his theories as the wild ravings of inexperience, but they were so systematically arranged, and his arguments so well supported, that though still in appearance incredulous, she began to fear him. She tried to reason with him, and finding him inflexible, learned to hate him. Strange to say, this feeling was infectious. His enthusiasm for good which did not exist, his contempt for the sacredness of authority, his ardor and imprudence were at all the antipodes of the usual routine of life. The worldly feared him. The young and inexperienced did not understand the lofty severity of his moral views, and disliked him as being different from themselves. Evadne entered but coldly into his systems. She thought he did well to assert his own will, but she wished that will to have been more intelligible to the multitude. She had none of the spirit of a martyr, and did not incline to share the shame and defeat of a fallen patriot. She was aware of the purity of his motives, the generosity of his disposition, his true and ardent attachment to her, and she entertained a great affection for him. He repaid the spirit of kindness with the fondest gratitude, and made her the treasure house of all his hopes. At this time Lord Raymond returned from Greece. No two persons could be more opposite than Adrian and he. With all incongruities of his character, Raymond was emphatically a man of the world. His passions were violent. As those often obtained a mastery over him, he could not always square his conduct to the obvious line of self-interest. But self-gratification, at least, was the paramount object with him. He looked on the structure of society as but part of the machinery which supported the web on which his life was traced. The earth was spread out as a highway for him, the heavens built up as a canopy for him. Adrian felt that he made a part of a great whole. He owned affinity not only with mankind, but all nature was akin to him. The mountains and sky were his friends, the winds of heaven and the offspring of earth his playmates, while he, the focus only of his mighty mirror, felt his life mingle with the universe of existence. His soul was sympathy and dedicated to the worship of beauty and excellence. Adrian and Raymond now came into contact, and a spirit of aversion rose between them. Adrian despised the narrow views of the politician, and Raymond held in supreme contempt the benevolent visions of the philanthropist. With the coming of Raymond was formed the storm that laid waste at one fell blow the gardens of delight and sheltered paths which Adrian fancied he had secured to himself, as a refuge from defeat and contumely. Raymond, the deliverer of Greece, the graceful soldier, who bore in his mien a tinge of all that, peculiar to her native clime, Evadne cherished as most dear. Raymond was loved by Evadne. Overpowered by her new sensations, she did not pause to examine them, or to regulate her conduct by any sentiments except the tyrannical one which suddenly usurped the empire of her heart. She yielded to its influence, and the two natural consequences in a mind unattuned to soft emotions was that the attentions of Adrian became distasteful to her. She grew capricious. Her gentle conduct towards him was exchanged for asperity and repulsive coldness. When she perceived the wild or pathetic appeal of his expressive countenance, she would relent, and for a while resume her ancient kindness. But these fluctuations shook to its depths the soul of sensitive youth. He no longer deemed the world subject to him because he possessed Evadne's love. He felt in every nerve that the dire storms of the mental universe were about to attack his fragile being, which quivered at the expectation of its advent. Perdita, who then resided with Evadne, saw the torture that Adrian endured. She loved him as a kind elder brother, a relation to guide, protect, and instruct her, without the too frequent tyranny of parental authority. She adored his virtues, and with mixed contempt and indignation, she saw Evadne pile drear sorrow on his head, for the sake of one who hardly marked her. In his solitary despair, Adrian would often seek my sister, and in covered terms express his misery, while fortitude and agony divided the throne of his mind. Soon, alas, was one to conquer. Anger made no part of his emotion. With whom should he be angry? Not with Raymond, who was unconscious of the misery he occasioned. Not with Evadne, for her soul wept tears of blood. Poor mistaken girl, slave not tyrant was she, and amidst his own anguish he grieved for her future destiny. Once a writing of his fell into Perdita's hands. It was blotted with tears. Well, might any blot it with the like. Life, it began thus, is not the thing romance writers describe it, going through the measure of a dance, and after various evolutions arriving at a conclusion, when the dancers may sit down and repose. While there is life, there is action and change. We go on, each thought linked to the other which was its parent, each act to a previous act. No joy or sorrow dies barren of progeny, which forever generated and generating weaves the chain that makes our life. Truly, disappointment is the guardian deity of human life. She sits at the threshold of unborn time and marshals the events as they come forth. Once my heart sat lightly in my bosom. All the beauty of the world was doubly beautiful, irradiated by the sunlight shed from my own soul. Oh, wherefore are love and ruin forever joined in this our mortal dream, so that when we make our hearts a lair for that gently seeming beast, its companion enters with it, and pitilessly lays waste what might have been a home and a shelter. By degrees his health was shaken by his misery, and then his intellect yielded to the same tyranny. His manners grew wild. He was sometimes ferocious, sometimes absorbed in speechless melancholy. Suddenly Evadne quitted London for Paris. He followed and overtook her when the vessel was about to sail. None knew what passed between them, but Perdita had never seen him since. He lived in seclusion, no one knew where, attended by such persons as his mother selected for that purpose. Chapter 4. The next day Lord Raymond called at Perdita's cottage on his way to Windsor's castle. My sister's heightened colour and sparkling eyes half revealed her secret to me. He was perfectly self-possessed. He accosted us both with courtesy, seemed immediately to enter into our feelings and to make one with us. I scanned his physiognomy, which varied as he spoke, yet was beautiful in every change. The usual expression of his eyes was soft, though at times he could make them even glare with ferocity. His complexion was colourless, and every trait spoke predominant self-will. His smile was pleasing, though disdain too often curled his lips, lips which to female eyes were the very throne of beauty and love. His voice, usually gentle, often startled you by a sharp discordant note, which showed that his usual low tone was rather the work of study than nature. Thus full of contradictions, unbending yet haughty, gentle yet fierce, tender and again neglectful, he, by some strange art, found easy entrance to the admiration and affection of women, now caressing and now tyrannizing over them according to his mood, but in every change a despot. At the present time, Raymond evidently wished to appear amiable. Wit, hilarity, and deep observation were mingled in his talk, rendering every sentence that he uttered as a flash of light. He soon conquered my latent distaste. I endeavored to watch him and Perdita and to keep in mind everything which I had learned to his disadvantage. But all appeared so ingenuous and all so fascinating that I forgot everything except the pleasure his society afforded me. Under the idea of initiating me in the scene of English politics and society, of which I was soon to become a part, he narrated a number of anecdotes and sketched many characters. His discourse, rich and varied, flowed on, pervading all my senses with pleasure. But for one thing he would have been completely triumphant. He alluded to Adrian and spoke of him with that disparagement that the worldly wise always attach to enthusiasm. He perceived the cloud gathering and tried to dissipate it, but the strength of my feelings would not permit me to pass thus lightly over this sacred subject. So I said emphatically, "Permit me to remark that I am devotedly attached to the Earl of Windsor. He is my best friend and benefactor. I reverence his goodness, I accord with his opinions, and bitterly lament his present and, I trust, temporary illness. That illness, from its peculiarity, makes it painful to me beyond words to hear him mentioned, unless in terms of respect and affection." Raymond replied, but there was nothing conciliatory in his reply. I saw that in his heart he despised those dedicated to any but worldly idols. Every man, he said, dreams about something: love, honor, and pleasure. You dream of friendship and devote yourself to a maniac. Well, if that be your vocation, doubtless you are in the right to follow it. Some reflection seemed to sting him, and the spasm of pain that for a moment convulsed his countenance checked my indignation. "Happier dreamers," he continued, "so that they are not awakened. Would I could dream, but broad and garish day is the element in which I live. The dazzling glare of reality inverts the scene for me. Even the ghost of friendship has departed, and love." He broke off, nor could I guess whether the disdain that curled his lip was directed against the passion or against himself for being its slave. This account may be taken as a sample of my intercourse with Lord Raymond. I became intimate with him, and each day afforded me occasion to admire more and more his powerful and versatile talents. That, together with his eloquence, which was graceful and witty, and his wealth now immense, caused him to be feared, loved, and hated beyond any other man in England. My descent, which claimed interest, if not respect, my former connection with Adrian, the favour of the ambassador whose secretary I had been, and now my intimacy with Lord Raymond, gave me easy access to the fashionable and political circles of England. To my inexperience, we had first appeared on the eve of a civil war. Each party was violent, acrimonious, and unyielding. Parliament was divided by three factions: aristocrats, democrats, and royalists. After Adrian's declared predilection to the republican form of government, the latter party had nearly died away, chiefless, guideless. But when Lord Raymond came forward as its leader, it revived with redoubled force. Some were royalists from prejudice and ancient affection, and there were many moderately inclined who feared alike the capricious tyranny of the popular party and the unbending despotism of the aristocrats. More than a third of the members ranged themselves under Raymond, and the number was perpetually increasing. The aristocrats built their hopes on their preponderous wealth and influence, the reformers on the force of the nation itself. The debates were violent, more violent the discourses held by each knot of politicians as they assembled to arrange their measures. Opprobrious epithets were bandied about, resistance even to death threatened. Meetings of the populace disturbed the quiet order of the country, except in war. How could all this end? Even as the destructive flames were ready to break forth, I saw them shrink back, allayed by the absence of the military, by the aversion entertained by everyone to any violence, save that of speech, and the cordial politeness and even friendship of the hostile leaders when they met in private society. I was from 1,000 motives induced to attend minutely to the course of events and watch each turn with intense anxiety. I could not but perceive that Perdita loved Raymond. Methought also that he regarded the fair daughter of Verney with admiration and tenderness. Yet I knew that he was urging forward his marriage with the presumptive heiress to the earldom of Windsor, with the keen expectation of the advantages that would thence accrue to him. All the ex-queen's friends were his friends. No week passed that he did not hold consultations with her at Windsor. I had never seen the sister of Adrian. I'd heard that she was lovely, amiable, and fascinating. Wherefore should I see her? There are times we have an indefinable sentiment of impending change for better or for worse. To arise from an event, and be it for better or for worse, we fear the change and shun the event. For this reason I avoided this high-born damsel. To me she was everything and nothing. Her very name, mentioned by another, made me start and tremble. The endless discussion concerning her union with Lord Raymond was real agony to me. Methought that, Adrian withdrawn from active life, and this beauteous Idris, a victim probably to her mother's ambitious schemes, I ought to come forward to protect her from undue influence, guard her from unhappiness, and secure to her freedom of choice, the right of every human being. Yet how was I to do this? She herself would disdain my interference. Since then I must be an object of indifference or contempt to her. Better, far better avoid her, nor expose myself before her and the scornful world to the chance of playing the mad game of a fond, foolish Icarus. One day, several months after my return to England, I quitted London to visit my sister. Her society was my chief solace and delight, and my spirits always rose at the expectations of seeing her. Her conversation was full of pointed remark and discernment. In a pleasant alcove, redolent with sweetest flowers, adorned by magnificent casts, antique vases, and copies of the finest pictures of Raphael, Correggio, and Claude, painted by herself, I fancied myself in a fairy retreat, untainted by and inaccessible to the noisy contentions of politicians and the frivolous pursuits of fashion. On this occasion my sister was not alone, nor could I fail to recognize her companion. It was Idris, the till now unseen object of my mad idolatry. What fitting terms of wonder and delight, in what choice expression and soft flow of language can I usher in the loveliest, wisest, best? How in poor assemblage of words convey the halo of glory that surrounded her, the thousand graces that waited unwearied on her? The first thing that struck you on beholding that charming countenance was its perfect goodness and frankness. Candour sat upon her brow, simplicity in her eyes, heavenly benignity in her smile. Her tall slim figure bent gracefully as a poplar to the breezy west, and her gait, goddess-like, was it that of a winged angel now alit from heaven's high floor. The pearly fairness of her complexion was stained by pure suffusion. Her voice resembled the low, subdued tenor of a flute. It was easiest perhaps to describe by contrast. I've detailed the perfections of my sister, yet she was utterly unlike Idris. Perdita, even when she loved, was reserved and timid. Idris was frank and confiding. The one recoiled to solitude, and she might there entrench herself from disappointment and injury. The other walked forth in open day, believing that none would harm her. Wordsworth has compared a beloved female to two fair objects in nature. But his lines always appeared to me rather a contrast than a similitude. A violet by a mossy stone, half hidden from the eye, fair as a star when only one is shining in the sky. Such a violet was sweet Perdita, trembling to entrust herself to the very air, cowering from observation, yet betrayed by her excellences, and repaying with 1,000 graces the labour of those who sought her in her lonely bypath. Idris was as the star, set in a single splendour in the dim anadem of balmy evening, ready to enlighten and delight the subject world, shielded herself from every taint by her unimagined distance from all that was not like herself, akin to heaven. And I'm going to leave it there on that poetic note. If you'd like to pick up where we left off, as always, you can find this on Project Gutenberg at the link in the show notes. Thanks again for joining me on this episode of Sleepy Time Tales, the podcast designed around a bedtime story to help you get a restful night. New episodes will be released every Sunday night to give you something fresh, to help you rest in a new week. But make sure to subscribe or follow in whatever service you use so that you get your new episodes whenever they come out. A reminder that the music for tonight is Sweet Night and Friends by Kumiko. Check out more of their work on their website, which you'll find linked in the show notes. Good night, and sweet dreams.